Ladies and gentlemen, ship review time. Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder. So today there is the first ship review on a heavy cruiser in War Thunder on my channel, in patch 1.89 in particular, and it is the IJN Furutaka, which is the highest battle rating end of the line heavy cruiser for the Japanese Imperial Navy. Now, since the beginning of the addition of destroyers, I was eager to figure out what bigger guns can do within War Thunder. And with tanks for quite a while, we had the biggest gun with 183mm, and 180mm were with the Kirov and also with the Drachinifel. And I was really interested how even bigger guns do in War Thunder. Are they worth the trade-off of DPM for the Alpha Strike, for the precision, for the long range dominance, or is it more like a dead end? Well, this has to be discussed with the IJN Furutaka, since it is the perfect example of this kind of thinking process. Now, 8-inch guns that are on this ship and also on the IJN Kaku, which is also an earlier version of the same ship class, they really deliver the pain towards the enemy. They really bring long-range dominance to the table. But how this will stack up to the Kirov, to the Brooklyn, and some other ships shall be discussed in a complete rundown on the statistics, and also how the ship fared in his historical career shall be discussed by the always awesome Drachinifel, which is another YouTuber, and again he has provided me with a fantastic, slightly longer 5-minute guide. Link to his channel in the video description down below.
The Furutaka was the lead ship of a two-ship class of heavy cruisers developed in the immediate aftermath of the First World War. She reflects a brief design period between the end of the First World War and the Washington Naval Treaty, where cruiser design was a little bit uncertain, with the Royal Navy producing the Hawkins class and the US Navy producing the Omaha class, with the Furutaka being a response to both. Matching the Hawkins, which was effectively a prototype heavy cruiser, and the Omaha, which in some ways was something of an overgrown destroyer, would seem like two diametrically opposed goals. And yet, despite building a ship that displaced slightly less than the rather large Hawkins class, the Japanese tried. For a displacement of just under 8,000 tons standard, they managed to come up with a ship that was almost as fast as the Omahas at 34.5 knots, and carried roughly the same kind of broadside as a Hawkins, with the British ship carrying 7.5-inch guns, but with 2 of those in wing turrets for a broadside of 6, the Furutakas carried 6 single 8-inch guns, 3 forward and 3 aft, with the centre turret in each cluster superfiring over the other 2. Despite her 8-inch armament, as with the Hawkins class, her armour was only proof against 6-inch shells from light cruisers. The rest of her armament was a relatively minimal battery of 4 3-inch anti-aircraft guns, and a total of 12 heavy 24-inch torpedo launchers, which came in 6 twin-tube launchers with 3 per side. Due to the high speed requiring a high freeboard to stop the ships converting themselves into submarines very quickly, the torpedoes could not be mounted on the main deck, as they would be falling at too steep an angle by the time they hit the water, and so the launchers were mounted on the middle deck instead. Almost immediately this was questioned by some Japanese officers who were concerned that a direct hit to the torpedo launchers could detonate the torpedoes and cause severe damage to the ship, as the explosion would be largely contained within the ship's structure, as opposed to deck-mounted launchers where most of the explosion would vent skywards. In the event, they would be proved right. In common with many Japanese warships of the interwar period, however, the Furutaka class would complete severely overweight and needed almost immediate remedy work in order to ensure they didn't just roll over. In the 1930s, the anti-aircraft battery was improved, first by replacing the original 3-inch guns with 4.7-inch guns on a like-for-like basis, and then in a major refit in the late 1930s, the 6 single main battery guns were replaced by 3 twin turrets with 8-inch 50 caliber guns, a pair superfiring forward and a single twin turret aft. The anti-aircraft battery was debatably further increased by the addition of 4 twin 25mm cannon, and the old sets of twin torpedo tubes were replaced by a single quadruple mount on either side, now firing the Type 93 or Long Lance torpedo. These launchers were also moved to the upper deck as the ship's overall freeboard and weight had changed during the refit. The older engines were replaced by newer units which increased the power available, and all of this increased the ship's displacement by about 500 tons, so to prevent draft becoming exceedingly deep, bulges were added to float the ship higher in the water, which increased the ship's beam but also improved anti-torpedo protection. In the opening part of the Second World War, the Furutaka was assigned to support Japanese landings in Guam, Wake Island, the Caroline Islands and the Marshall Islands, and so was not present in the escort force for Pearl Harbor. Furutaka would be present for the Battle of the Coral Sea, but could do very little to stop the combined air groups of Yorktown and Lexington from sinking the aircraft carrier Shoho and damaging the Shokaku. Furutaka's most successful engagement would come as part of the Japanese force at the Battle of Savo Island, where she would take part in the destruction of the heavy cruisers HMAS Canberra and USS Quincy. However, her luck would run out at the Battle of Cape Esperance, where she was engaged by multiple US warships, including the destroyer Duncan and the heavy cruiser USS Salt Lake City. Repeated hits caused the fears of almost 20 years ago to become reality, as her torpedo tubes ignited, with a large fire attracting shellfire from practically every US ship involved. She was then hit by a torpedo, and although she was able to withdraw with the rest of the Japanese formation, she very soon lost power. And in the early morning darkness, at about 2:30 in the morning, she would sink beneath the waters just northwest of Savo Island, with most of her survivors being picked up. Although the majority of her crew were rescued by other Japanese ships, 115 of the crew were recovered by the Americans and taken as prisoners of war, spending the rest of the war in the rather pleasant environment of New Zealand.
Let's begin the review with having a look at the armor, and let's begin at the very middle of the hull, and then we have the main citadel side protection with a 3-inch rolled homogeneous armor plating. It actually extends quite a bit out of the water and a little bit below the waterline. The major bulkheads in front and also in the rear of the main citadel is 105 millimeters thick. That means angling actually makes sense, and the deck protection is 35 millimeters and 32 millimeters with some 38 millimeter extensions for the funnels, and that means it is not really that badly protected when it comes to the citadel. The magazine protection is way below the waterline, and the deck protection is 35 millimeters, the side protection 52 millimeters, and the front bulkhead also 35 millimeters. The same for the rear of the ship, where it actually misses the rear bulkhead, and it has some additional 10 and 35 millimeters protection behind it. Then when it comes to the turrets, the barbettes are protected by 57 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor, but very often that is not good enough to even withstand high explosive shells from other cruisers, especially base fuse HE. The turrets themselves are all around only 25 millimeters for all three turrets, and that is a massive problem. Even HE shells and even 20mm armor piercing shells and everything in between can easily knock them out, together with their slow turret traverse and also the long repair times, in conjunction with the ability of the ship to catch fire even from destroyer HE shells, just is very punishing because of all the repair cycles. It just gets added, it's punishing, and so you never get actually hit in the first place if you want to keep your guns firing. The firing angles of the turrets are actually pretty good for both the front and rear turrets. It just takes a while to spin them around. Then we also have here the long lance torpedoes, and let's go to them. There you can see we have overall 16. We have 2 quad launchers, and you can repair them once each, which is currently a unique trait for the Japanese. the torpedoes are simply the best. When we now have a look at the magazines, you can see that they are way below the waterline, which is really great. So they are difficult to hit and they are protected by armor, but nowhere near anything the protection like some of the German cruisers or some of the other nations' cruisers enjoy, especially since there is no turtleback array armor or anything like this. So the ship has a huge silhouette. It is quite easy to hit and to damage. The funnels are easy to hit and knock out, reducing your ship speed, and again the turrets are very easy to knock out and easy to hit in the first place. So to put the ship into perspective, at least when it comes to all the other 5.7 battle rating cruisers, we have to look at some numbers. Yes, that might be a little bit of a dry section, but numbers don't lie, at least in War Thunder, and so you have here some sort of comparison of value. First of all, we have the least amount of guns, leaving the HMS Tiger aside because of the auto-loading mechanism that it profits from, but therefore as a trade-off, for those 6 guns we have the highest caliber with 8-inch, aka 203mm. Those 20cm/50 year type number 2 guns also have the least amount of shells available. And while that would be tragic for all the other 6-inch guns ships, for the Furutaka it's not all that bad because the reload is quite long with 15 seconds. So to actually run out of ammunition even throughout the entire battle is not all that common. However, that means in return you have a very bad and very tragic DPM of only 24 rounds per minute. That's not even half of what the Kirov can deliver, and this DPM is already quite bad. You also have to suffer from the Kirov syndrome, or also the Krasny-Kafka's problem, where your turrets, as I said in the beginning, get knocked out constantly, further reducing that DPM that is only available with a fully trained ace crew. And on top of this, if you have to extinguish a fire, if you have to repair any part of the ship and or stop flooding and pump the water out, that low DPM gets lowered even more. And as I said, the turrets get knocked out very frequently. Also the turret traverse speed is very bad. So already we can see that the best playstyle is to stay at range and try to use the precision advantage and also the overall range advantage. Now, before we continue to talk about the firepower when looking at the ammunition that the ship has available, we also have to look at the torpedoes. And gladly, the ship has torpedoes at all, although they are not really that useful in my opinion, despite being the best torpedoes, because I have not seen that many encounter modes, sadly, and I played for nearly a week. So with the 610mm Type 93 long lances, you not only have the most amount of torpedoes, but also statistically they are the best. With nearly half a ton of TNT warhead, they deliver a one-shot in 99% of the cases. The range with 20 kilometers is also fantastic, and it doesn't suffer with a slow speed. In fact, we have the fastest speed with 93 kilometers. But you only have those 16 with reloading once completely, and you can only launch 4 at a time per side from one quadruple launcher. The displacement of the ship is kind of average for the 5.3 cruisers. The speed, the top speed is also kind of average with 61 kilometers per hour. Only the Kirov is significantly faster in fact, and the fragility of overall the ship with the armor layout and the turret armor gets further amplified by the rather low crew of only 680 men. Let's now have a look at the 3 different shell types that the ship can choose from, and we begin with the stock 20.3cm Type 0 HE, and that is obviously an HE shell. The mass velocity with 835 meters per second is kind of average in this comparison. The HMS Tiger's HE shells are significantly slower, whereas then the Nuremberg and the Kirov's HE shells are significantly faster. So it is kind of right average, right slap bang in the middle. The TNT equivalent is with 8.16 kilograms, the highest that there is. Only rivaled really by the Kirov with 7.9 kilograms and 7.1 kilogram for the HMS Tiger respectively. This is the highest amount of TNT in any shell, and it reflects also the damage output with the single shell hit, but also in terms of penetration. The kinetic factor of the shell itself goes up to even 93 millimeters at 1000 meters, and then the minimum amount of penetration against any angle at any range is 60 millimeters. This comes from the explosive mass of 8.16 kilograms itself. That is obviously highly effective versus patrol boats and destroyers, but also versus other cruisers. It's not just doing a lot of damage to the superstructure, causing also fires, but it also can knock out turrets, and it can punch through even some of the belt armor, causing flooding, fire, and internal module damage. So those shells are really, really nasty. Again, the trade-off is here the very, very low DPM. But the advantage, as you can see, is not all that great because the DPM is so low, and the very same kind of damage output can be caused by the Kirov and also the HMS Tiger, which have twice or 3 times the DPM. And so you can see where the problem lies. To bring the guns on target, to actually fire and hit them. Granted, the precision is really great, and also the long range shell travel flight time is okay. The damage output is not really that amazing with that first stock HE shell. Maybe it gets better with the tier 1 upgrade, and that is the 20.3 centimeter type OHE with distance fuse. So it's the very same shell, same muzzle velocity, same TNT equivalent filler, same penetration values, only with a distance fuse. So while I personally think that this shell is helplessly bad versus aircraft despite having the highest bursting charge, because of the very low DPM and also the slow turret traverse, overall the ship doesn't really have the best of air defenses. I think maybe this shell can be used to rain death on patrol boats from above, but this requires very good handling abilities at the hands of the captain, and you also can rain death from above on ships behind islands. But this is highly situational. This is only when you have a 1 versus 1 with controlled circumstances. So it might be a little bit of a gimmick, but it still might be possible. As anti-aircraft shell, sadly I don't really see the point of it, thanks to the low DPM and slow turret traverse of the ship. Now let's come to the third and last shell type, which is also a tier 1 upgrade, the 20.3 centimeter type 91 AP. It's an armor piercing ballistic capped round, and the muzzle velocity is kind of average with 835 meters per second. But outstanding is not just only the bursting charge of 3.1 kilogram for an armor piercing round, but also the penetration power of 364 millimeters. However, the shell doesn't really seem to be able to hold this amount of penetration power, and at 15 kilometers, 15,000 meters, we're looking at only 43 millimeters of penetration. But that is more than good enough for any sort of naval engagement in War Thunder so far. However, now we have to look at the Kirov as the direct competitor. And this is where then, again, the DPM comes into the play. Because the Kirov delivers more than twice as many shells of the best performing in terms of penetration shell. However, the Kirov also has a semi-armor piercing round. And while the penetration power is 20% less compared to the Furutaka, it delivers more than 2.5 times the amount of TNT filler with 7 kilograms versus the 3.1 of the Furutaka. So that means it delivers 4 times the amount of explosive mass into the citadel of an enemy cruiser per minute. And this is where then the Furutaka loses a lot of its magic. And again, it shows that the Kirov and also the Brooklyn are just really, really good light cruisers or light cruiser, heavy cruiser intermediates. So that shows that the Furutaka really suffers at the hand of the DPM. Nevertheless, the Type 91 armor piercing round is very good at punching big, fat, nasty holes into enemy hulls, and that very reliable, especially at range. It is just the case that the Kirov is, again, better at it. So, what do I think about the ship in some sort of final verdict? Well, I think it is an interesting ship to play, and definitely it satisfied my interest in knowing how bigger guns work. And I think that this is the right direction for ships in War Thunder if a lot of things get changed. And that is the critical point, because since the introduction of the first cruisers, the big problem of cruisers being irrelevant to the outcome of the gameplay has not changed. So even if you manage to kill all the destroyers and cruisers and deliver all the one-shot blows, which is highly unrealistic, sadly, in War Thunder at this moment with this ship, you just don't get the caps. And there is one reserve patrol boat that just caps 2 or even all 3 capture points. You cannot lock onto it due to the game mechanics, and if you hit it, it's not guaranteed that you one-shot it. And with that amount of low DPM, that's just how the majority of games were lost. Where this ship can actually shine with the long lance torpedoes and the long range firepower and the damage output of the shells would be in counter mode. Sadly, I get less and less in counter mode. The next thing is that the majority of matches, if you get them at all after like 5 to 10 minutes of queue time, is only a 6 versus 6, whereas then there are 12 player names on both sides, but half of them are bots, so it's 6 players versus 6 players, and a lot of players just bail out after the first death, reducing the impact that you can make. And so the experience of the ship by default is very bad. This is before we talk even about the anti-aircraft capabilities, because there is little that you can do to prevent an enemy bomber or an enemy attacker from YOLO rushing you. And I have experienced this quite a bit. The amount and also performance of 25mm guns is not enough even at short range, even against patrol boats that are only 2 kilometers away. The firing angles and turret traverse to defend yourself from close range attacks is also not the greatest. The 120mm secondary guns or anti-aircraft guns, well, you only have 4, 2 per side, single mountings. They're also easy to hit and knock out. They don't have proximity fuse shells, and the rate of fire as well as their turret traverse is also not high enough to deal with aircraft and not even deliver some sort of last sort defense at close quarters like the Drachinifel has or some of the other cruisers. So the ship relies on staying at long range and delivering heavy blows to the enemy. Very often this is just simply something that you can't manage to do, and that is a shame. That is really a shame. So that is the final verdict of the ship. It is not fitting the meta, it's situational. When it works, it's deeply satisfying, and I love to rack up enemy cruisers and to AP them to death. And that just only works as long as I don't receive return fire, because the endless vicious cycle of being in the repair, then getting set on fire and flooding while I just can't bring the guns to the enemy or on the enemy, then I miss half the salvos, and that despite the best aim due to natural dispersion, which is not that bad, but simply the punishment for missing and the punishment for getting into even a medium to long range engagement with an enemy cruiser can be your death without you ever really doing that much damage to the enemy. That's just the result of me playing the ship for a week. I worked really hard on this review and still I couldn't get the maximum out of this. There are too many circumstances that have to be swung in this ship's favor to really shine, and that is not the sign of a good, powerful ship. And mostly it is down to the turrets being that weak. It is the Drachinifel syndrome, it's the Kirov syndrome. Your turrets are that easy to hit, they are big, they are easy to knock out, and they take so long to repair, and then the repair cycle begins. And combined with that low DPM, again, very, very situational. That is sadly very frustrating, that is not fun, and it is more like enduring the pain rather than enjoying it. And this ship is the end of the line, and I think that the IJN Kaku is just simply better suited for this, because if you lose 1 turret, big deal, you have 5 left. So this is a very strange ship to review. I'm sorry if I couldn't deliver better footage, but that was the best that I could do, and I played all classes, I played every single ship in the game, so yeah, the ship doesn't really fit the meta, which is kind of sad, but that's just how it is. And even if you manage to make this ship work right now, remember what happened to a lot of the other cruisers that were previously really powerful throughout the patches. Remember the power creep, and guess what? We'll see more heavy cruisers throughout all the other nations as well in the future, and they will have higher rate of fire, they will have better armor protection, and they will have more guns. And I don't see this ship being then that useful. That is the future of this ship. That kind of saddens me, but that's how it is.